The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. Story 1. If you are depressed, avoid dark places. You won't like what is waiting for you there. It's been some time before I had gotten a chance to go back home. I went to Canada for my university and am currently looking for work. The economy was down the shitter. My friends from uni all dispersed into their own adult lives, and I was stuck, alone in my apartment, staring at a dwindling list of relevant job offers online. I'd started staying up later and later, where the first sunlight was usually also the last natural light I would see before crashing on my couch. I was at my limit, not enjoying much of anything, and all my senses feeling numb. I was just pushing on through to the next day. I'd decided to save up some money to return back to my family for a short while, just a few weeks to decompress and see if that would help me. I come from one of the smaller cities in Midwestern Germany. There's absolutely nothing notable about it other than being located near the forest where my ancestors fought back the Romans. But the people are nice, as far as Germans go. We are a weird people, I admit, outwardly cold towards those we don't know, until we get together for a few beers or a piece of cake, after which you would think we were friends our entire lives. But that's exactly what I wanted then. If I managed to get out of my hole to grab a coffee, those trained smiles just reminded me of how miserable I was. I needed the gruffness of my fatherland and the reality of my own family. My arrival in the first few days went about as well as I'd anticipated. I was greeted with hugs and kisses and had to tell the same stories about 100 times before crashing on my old bed. Even at home, I barely managed to get outside. I'd stay up, smoke and drink on the balcony before letting sleep carry me through the day. My family was understandably worried. I hadn't really told them the extent of how shitty I had been feeling. They tried their best, considering they didn't really know how to deal with my mental status. It wasn't their fault. Their words weren't reaching me. At least, they managed to figure out pretty quickly to drop the subject for now, attempting instead to simply cheer me up by being themselves and acting as if everything was normal. It worked for me, even if it wasn't quite the reality check I needed. I even managed to get up early enough to see them at breakfast. I still remember the soft smiles they gave me when they saw me. I shrugged, sat down, and ate some eggs. One day, an old high school friend, Max, who had also managed to make his way back home and had heard of my arrival, hit me up via text and asked if I wanted to go on a walk. I wanted to decline, but at the same time, I felt bad enough that I had never once texted him, and now here he was, inviting me. We used to live close together, so all he needed to do was pick me up at home. We decided to retread our old childhood stomping grounds in the forest that bordered our suburb. It's the same forest I mentioned earlier. By the way, as he rang the doorbell, I was overcome by this terrible anxiety. How would he see me? What would he think of me? I opened the door and he immediately smiled and said, "How are you, you fucking ghost?" I couldn't help but grin and we hugged. "Could be better. Bro, you know how it is," I replied. "Ain't that the truth?" He chuckled and beckoned me outside. I will be paraphrasing some of what was said as I'm translating it. Otherwise, I would just sound off. As we hiked through the downtrodden dirt paths, through the luscious trees, bright green and alight with the sounds of birds chirping away, we barely said a word to each other. I guess he understood what I was going through, perhaps heard the bare minimum from whoever told him I was even here. At the time, I thought he pitied me, and that's why he came to pick me up. We exchanged the odd question about what we were doing. For me, nothing. He was training to become a nurse. which honestly surprised me, seeing as he always was more one for making jokes and sleeping in class rather than being passionate about helping people. But who was I to judge? We decided to walk up the hill further into the woods. Unlike the miles and miles of dark green conifers you might be picturing from North America, this forest is more of a mixture of beeches, birches, and fir trees. Most areas are well lit, as the sun has enough space to seep through. However, I've always felt it gives you a false sense of security. You think you can see everything, but in the end, it is still you, alone in the woods, dismissing every shadow or sign of movement as leaves and branches, when in reality, you really have no idea what might be lurking behind those tree trunks. Another aspect is that while the paths seem to form a natural clearing, it is just as easy to get lost, mistaking a more flat patch on the ground for a man-made path, just because the leaves don't obscure the sun, letting the forest swallow you up with ease. I realized then that I'd never been aware of that until now. I've always seen the woods as our kingdom, as nature inviting us to be free and just be children. Something wrong? Max asked. Forest seems different. Might just be me, though. Max nodded and replied, I get what you mean. Seems less friendly now that we're older, doesn't it? Exactly. Max stopped for a second and frowned, before suggesting, listen, one thing is actually different. You remember the meadow, with the river and the bridge? Sure. You recall that concrete bunker that was next to it? We always just thought it was something to do with the power grid. I did remember it. I remembered the way it stood out as an ugly minimalist block, threatening the serenity of nature. The graffiti didn't help. We would usually stay away, not minding it. I nodded. Well, that one is gone, but there's another one. Popped up a while ago. Don't know when exactly. Lisa's aunt noticed it while walking her dog. Want to check it out? I raised my eyebrow. Why would we want to do that? I don't know, man. I'm trying my best here. I could sense his desperation, reminding me of my parents, seeing me every night before they went to bed, asking me to hang out with them. I shrugged, grabbed his shoulders, and said, lead the way then. He gave me a weak smile and we walked on. Indeed, the structure was, in terms of how it was built, identical to the one we saw as kids. We walked around it, checking every angle. There really was nothing remarkable about it, but something was finally stirring inside my cold heart. A sense of adventure, something new and unexpected to be discovered. I didn't know how long it would last, but I wanted to cling onto it and keep it inside me for as long as I could. We found a door on one side, reading no authorized access. Max poked me and asked, is it just me, or does this door look different from the old one? It did. There's a handle on this one and no lock. The old one just had a keyhole. I suppose it was harder to open from the outside. I looked around, trying to get a better lay of the land. Have you noticed something else? Max tried to follow my eyes. What? There are no power lines or towers. The old one had those too. Maybe it's underground. Save the trees and all of that. Maybe, I responded. Max took another walk around the box, shouting from the other side. Nobody has tagged it yet. Either. Can't be that old then. Come back and give me a lift. Max helped me onto the roof. There was nothing, not even an HVAC box. Bro, what do you see? Nothing. Max, not a thing. I jumped back down and looked at my friend. We both started to grin. This little detour had just turned into a bona fide mystery. I guess there's only one thing to do now, I said, looking at the door handle. I guess you're right. We both didn't move a muscle, exchanging glances. Max took a step back, holding his hands up. Why don't you go ahead? Wimp. Do it then, big guy. All right. I slowly placed my hands on the handle, as if it may be electrified, and tried twisting it. Nothing happened. I could feel Max deflate behind me, but I wouldn't give up. I tried it with some more force and noticed the door buckle. I wouldn't stop now. I was feeling good. I kept pushing and pulling, using my foot against the wall for more force. Finally, the door gave way, and with it, I fell backward, crashing into leaves and dirt. Max was equally shocked and amused. Okay then, big guy, you go to the gym? Not really. The door must have just rusted shut, I said as I got back up and dusted myself off. We both took a look inside but couldn't see anything. But it was more than that. There was a thick wall of darkness just past the precipice of the doorway. No light from the forest dared to enter it. Even the birds seemed frightened, enveloping both of us in absolute silence. We tried to make anything out inside, but we couldn't. It was just black. I got out my phone and turned on the flashlight. Shining it inside, it barely managed to penetrate, forcing me to get closer and closer. It felt a chill come from this portal I had just opened up. Nah, man, this ain't right, Max huffed behind me. Just give me a second. I got as close to the opening as I was comfortable with and held my phone out. My fingers brushed past the boundary, and it was running them under icy cold water. I shuddered but tried to steady my arm. I can make out a hallway. That's it. I think it splits just a bit further in, I told Max. Cool. You want to lead the way then? You brought me here. Why don't you go first? I opened the damn thing. Exactly, finders keepers. Aren't nurses supposed to be able to be brave or something? First of all, nurse in training. Second of all, you're thinking of firefighters. And thirdly, what the fuck do you mean brave? It's like staring into the Marianas Trench. This doesn't seem natural. I mean, it's not. Somebody built it. Yeah, that somebody clearly doesn't want anybody to enter. I got agitated. He had brought me here. He agreed to open the door. Why did he want to ruin this for me? Isn't this what he wanted? Isn't this what everybody at home wants for me? To finally fucking act and not just waste away in my room? You can stand guard, I replied gruffly. Max put his hands in the air, took another look at me, and said, "You owe me a drink after this," before taking out his phone and turning the flashlight on. I felt my anger vanish, and we proceeded inside. We were definitely not dressed warm enough. As soon as both of us passed through the doorway, we took one last look at the forest behind us. There was nobody there to save us. We were alone. Maybe I shouldn't make Max do this. He was right. Something was very wrong here. I could feel my heartbeat fastening and my confidence replaced with fear. Max took the first step forward and said, "At least the door won't suddenly close on us." "I suppose so," I replied, following after him, hyping myself up. I wanted this. I needed this. I kept thinking to myself, the first few meters were easy, as long as the light and escape were still clearly behind us. But we both felt it. There was a pressure here, and the further we went in, the more it told us to leave. We made it towards the end, and indeed there was a split. "Which way, boss?" Max asked. I paused, shining my light in both directions. It looked to be more of the same. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I asked Max. Max gave me an agitated look and sighed. "You wanted this, right? And I don't abandon my friends." His words stung. I looked at my feet in embarrassment. "I'm sorry. I didn't text or call." I could make out his smile, and he replied, slapping my back, "It's all right. Bro, I get it. Gotta make up for lost time now, at least." "Yeah," I responded weakly. "So which way?" "No idea. Got a preference?" "Well, the left is one shade of pitch black, and the right is another shade. I'll pick right. Always my favorite side." "Right. It is," I proclaimed. We walked on, leaving the safety of the front door only in our memories. Slowly inching forward, our flashlights barely made a dent into the void. There was no glass, no doors, just concrete and the linoleum floor. After a little while, Max tapped on my back. "Hey, did you notice something?" I stopped. "No. What's up?" "This whole box wasn't more than a few meters wide, right? I did take me like 2 or 3 steps to get around. Well, he held his arms up. How long have we been walking in here? Exactly. How the fuck is that possible? It isn't it? Not only did this structure come out of nowhere, it also had complete disregard for the laws of physics. First, the light, which we simply waved away, but now this. I was beginning to wonder whether this was worth it. After all, torn between my need for excitement and a basic fear of the unknown. As if to answer us, our flashlights made out an irregularity ahead of us. It was another door. We made our way closer to the door, and Max slowly tried out the handle. The door opened into more black nothingness, where this time our light managed to illuminate even less. Max took another step, and suddenly he was gone. I blinked for a second, only to hear him scream and hear his voice draw further and further away from me. Running towards the doorframe, I only caught a glimpse of a bright dot falling further and further into an abyss we both had failed to see.
Max!
I called out to him several times, but he was nowhere to be seen. Even his flashlight had been swallowed up. I continued shouting out his name, but there was no response. I was suddenly very alone, very scared, and very much ashamed. Max was down there because of me, because I craved adventure so much in my boring, unfulfilled existence that I was willing to not only risk my life, but his as well. We both looked inside this alien box and knew something was wrong, yet I decided to go in anyway. Even if it wasn't dangerous, it was likely still very illegal. I've destroyed public property, entered a sealed-off area, and made my friend an accessory to my crime. A friend who had just been swallowed up by what looked to be a night sky without stars, utterly devoid of life. Then I heard it. It was a faint moan, barely audible but coming from below. I peeked my head past the doorway, again shouting, "Max, are you there?" The only response was more moaning. I grabbed my phone and tried to find anything to guide me. It couldn't just be a giant hole, could it? I nearly dropped my phone. The more desperately I tried to make something out. There was a little overhang just past the doorway. I got on all fours and crawled forward, shining my flashlight around me. Max's moans didn't cease. "Don't worry. Bro, I'm gonna come get you." I didn't really believe in the words I was saying. That wasn't until I noticed something in the overhang, just to my left. It went down, but when I looked closely, I saw that the drop was only a few centimeters. I slithered to my left and tried to follow the small drop. Indeed, just past the first one followed another similar decrease. Steps! They were hard to make out, seeing as the floor was as black as its surroundings, but the texture was different. They didn't particularly leave a lot of room to actually stand on, explaining why Max had so easily stumbled past them into the opening. If I was careful enough, I could manage my way down. So, I stood up and took my first few steps deeper into the void. My flashlight as my only companion, every move felt like a gamble. Would I reach the next step, stumble, or completely lose my balance and fall into the hole? I made damn sure to hug the wall. Clearly grooved. It must have been a circle, and a massive one at that. While I couldn't make out the door where I came from, I noticed quickly that it took a lot longer to traverse this staircase than I'd imagined. One more step and suddenly, I fell. I either missed a step or there was none. Everything looked the same, like nothing. I almost felt weightless, like drifting through the cosmos. There was no sound and almost no draft of air resisting my falling body, if not for my apparent ability to breathe and scream. You could be fooled into thinking this whole structure was housing a dark vacuum, ready to swallow any outside life into its empty space. I screamed and screamed as I fell, but the longer I dropped, the less energy I had to scream. Flailing around in desperation, I tried to reach around me in the hopes of grasping a ledge, even if it would rip my arms out of their sockets. No luck. I just kept falling down that impossibly deep hole. All I kept thinking was, how could have Max survived the fall? Did I mistake his death screams echoing out as pained groans? But I would soon get my answer. Trying to think back to it, the fall must have taken about 5 minutes, more or less. That kind of distance in the real world would likely see you ending up as a pancake. But in this madhouse, a fall like that simply ended up with a broken phone and you lying on damp concrete, disoriented and sore from a somewhat rough landing. No doubt, my impact still hurt, but I was alive. I tried to sit up. My head was pounding and I could feel the scrapes all over my body. I stumbled around in the darkness, stumbling over what I felt to be my broken phone. Turning around was like turning in a corn maze. Max!
Max!
I shouted. If he was still alive, he must be able to hear me, right? Julian. I heard Max's voice somewhere from my right. I'm here, over here. His voice sounded weak and scared. Quickly. I'm coming. Bro! I slowly made my way towards the direction his voice came from until I eventually fell over something. Ouch. What the fuck? Max cried out in pain. I scrambled and finally, my hands made their way to his shoulder. I couldn't help but give him a hug. I decided not to say it. Bro, I'm hurt. Get off me already. He groaned at me. How long did you fall for? I asked, just to ascertain whether I was making something up. A few good minutes. Honestly, don't know how I survived, but I landed on my fucking ankle. It's done for. Justin. Let me help you. I reached around him and helped him up. Now what? He asked. I couldn't see him. The darkness was too powerful, even more suffocating down here, but it felt good to hold him. Know somebody was there. I tried to force a chuckle and said, original exit is not an option anymore. I don't know why, but I could feel Max staring daggers at me. He sighed and said, let's walk in one direction, find a wall, and walk around. Like in a maze. What? The best way to escape a maze is to pick a wall and stick to it. No matter what, sooner or later, you will find an exit. I explained. Makes sense. Where did you hear that? Internet. Spent a lot of time there. I figured, he said almost wistfully. What does the internet say about impossible, fucking black hellscapes? Don't go in. I fucking hate you, Max said. Something dropped in my stomach, that feeling of having disappointed someone you hold dearly. I asked, do you mean that? Max snorted and responded, depends on if we make it out of here, buddy. We walked and walked. Max's phone also broke, so we had to just commit to a direction and hope for the best. We kept going strong, but soon both our bodies became weary. We became thirsty and hungry, and our bruised selves were starting to slow down. Every moment we were hoping to just run into a wall and break our noses, shouting in pain and joy, but that stop never came. We barely said a word to each other, just holding out our arms around us. I was the first to break down, almost taking Max along with me on my way to my knees. I couldn't help but start sobbing. There was a constant back and forth in my head, as my mind raced from each moment I fucked up and what I should have done better. Never should have entered the building. Never should have forced Max to come with me. Should have run out and asked for help when he fell. I should have never come back. A dark thought passed through. If I had died in Canada, my parents wouldn't have known of it for some time, staying blissfully ignorant and happy, thinking that their son was trying their best. If I were to disappear in these woods, in this hole, it wouldn't take them as long. Their devastation, sorrow, and grief would come much quicker. Again, when I think about it now, it seems like such a strange line of reasoning, but in the end, I know now as I did then what my mind was trying to tell me. You've fucked up. Max tried to console me. Don't worry, we're going to make it. Other people have seen this place. Maybe somebody will come and find us. I'm sorry, was all I could get out. I know, buddy. This time Max held me, and so we just remained there for a bit, hugging it out, trying to get some relief out of our situation. We would venture onwards, the reality dawning on us that the bottom of this hole was larger than we could have imagined. At some point, we couldn't take it anymore, exhausted. We decided to take a break and sat down. Max took his jacket, bundled it up, and used it as a pillow to raise his ankle. I couldn't help but look around, knowing I wouldn't make out anything. Eventually, my head felt weary, and I followed Max's idea and used my jacket as a pillow. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm tired," I responded. "Yes, fall asleep." "Hey, don't judge me. You sat down first," Max said. I didn't say anything. As if electrocuted, every hair on my body stood up, and I became tense, my eyes staring widely into the abyss above me. "What?" I asked. I didn't say anything, Max answered. We both stood up, gripping our jackets and each other. "Just rest," a voice said again. It was close, somewhere around us. It sounded human and comforting, but upon hearing it again, it was clear that it wasn't mine or Max's. We started turning in circles, on guard for anything to come out at us. Max whispered, "I say we run as fast as we can." "Got it." The voice appeared again. "Don't run. Be with me." It sent a shudder down our spines. It was different this time. Before it was a male voice. Now it sounded like the soothing tone of a mother tucking you into bed at night. "Go!" Max shouted, and we booked it. Admittedly, given our circumstances, we could have known it was pointless, but our need to survive took over. We ran as fast as we could, as fast as our tired legs allowed us. Max's ankle wasn't helping. Then there it was, in the distance. We saw a light. There was hope, and that propelled us to pick up the pace just a little. Arm in arm, we made our way towards the bright spot in the distance. I could hear Max's moans get increasingly more severe. He wouldn't be able to take much more. Then the light moved, ever so slightly. I stopped us in our tracks. "Shh," I said to Max. The light almost danced, left to right and up and down. We couldn't help but follow it. As it danced, it became bigger and brighter. "Oh shit," Max whispered. We hunkered down, but we knew it was too late. It was moving towards us. "Oh shit. Oh fuck. Oh my fucking god." Max was losing it. I slapped his shoulder. "Get it together." With the light, a figure appeared in the darkness. It followed the light, almost floating towards us. We had to shield our eyes from the bobbing ball that illuminated us. We had been in the dark so long that it felt as if we were looking into the sun. The orb moved to be just above us, and the figure stopped about 2 or 3 meters from us, its back still covered in darkness. It looked like a woman, pale yet beautiful and naked. "Please stay," she said. "I'll make you comfortable." Max shouted, "Just let us leave." "Please!" The figure receded back into the darkness and reappeared behind us. Now a man, just as pale and handsome. Max gripped me harder. I asked, "How many are you?" The man responded, "Only one, but I can be many." It looked at me and tilted its head. "Why did you come here?" "We just wanted to explore," I said. "You did. Your friend did not." My heart froze over, but Max tapped my shoulder. "I wouldn't just abandon my friend like that," he answered. The creature moved closer to Max. "I don't want you. You are no good to me anymore." Something came from the darkness and snatched Max. Even with the light, I couldn't make it out. A black mass entangled Max's legs and lifted him up. I managed to hold on to him, and a tug of war began. All the while Max was screaming. It nearly got dragged with him, but after a while, he seemed to have been released and dropped back onto the floor. This time he hit his head and was knocked out cold. I checked on him, but apart from a pulse and shallow breathing, there was no response. "Curious," the man said. "The way you fight back. Maybe I misjudged you." It came closer again. I could hear a large mass dragging and a foul smell emanating from the man's direction. I had to cover my nose for a second. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Your darkness. It gives me pleasure." "What darkness? Why were you drawn to this place? Why wasn't your friend?" "I just wanted to explore. Wanted to do something." Yes, but didn't this place strike you as unusual?" I looked down. "Yes, you embrace the darkness. Why? You seem to know why. There was a guttural sound, profoundly unsettling and unholy. It sounded like laughter. Once again, the figure vanished and appeared beside me. Now a young woman, closer to my age. You want to stay here, don't you? Let the darkness around you match the one inside your mind. My hands became fists. What are you talking about? Do you really care where you are? The end would be just the same and just as welcomed. Your parents would be devastated either way. I twitched slightly. Did it know what I was thinking? I don't want to fucking die. I resisted. But you don't care if you do. It responded, and it was right. My body went limp, and again there was that unnatural laughter. The girl took a deep breath and smiled. Ah yes, despair. Humans are full of it. Human? What are you? The figure smiled, and the orb lowered to be just above my head. My eyes widened. As I followed it, I could see a long, thin stretch of skin elongate towards the figure, which was now raised up in the air, and in front of me were eyes, large, black, and too many to count, paired with one enormous row of sharp teeth. That was about as much as I could and wanted to make out. It spoke again, its maw unmoving, and its voice a cacophony of seemingly thousands of different people speaking in unison. See me? I wanted to run, but I knew it was futile. Besides, Max was still lying by my feet. I wouldn't just leave him with this monster. I couldn't help but my body began to shake, and I was beginning to hyperventilate. Yes, the creature droned, all its eyes fixed on me. Kneeling down, I felt the darkness encroach on me. What could it do? Should I just submit? Maybe I could bargain to save Max, and at least do one good thing with my life. I thought about it. In the end, what would happen if I made it out of this? Nothing good. I would be back to my same old, miserable life, only now with the knowledge that creatures like this exist. What if this wasn't the only one? What if there were more? Why did I have to go inside? Why? 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 My mind was spiraling once again. I could feel the monster drawing closer, soaking in my misery. Why wouldn't it just take me? Why make me choose? Was it savoring me? I asked. Why not just get it over with? Simple. Your total submission is the ultimate meal, the only way to make you mine. What if I refuse? It laughed, and its whole mass was shaking. I am older than your human history could ever conceive. I will wait. Others will come, and one day you will find your way back to me. I'm not bound here. I live in your darkness. That's it? I couldn't believe it, trying to hide my fear in a simple response. That's it. You will remember me. He won't. You will come back to me. Of that, I have no doubt. My darkness will always be there to comfort you. I took another look at Max and remembered the way he initially asked me to come out. And now here he is, stuck with me in this abomination. Nevertheless, I couldn't help but smile. He really was there for me. I want to leave. You are just another thing in my life. Another thing I will get over, just like I always do. The creature drew back a little, but I could make out how its teeth were forming a smile. So be it, it said, and suddenly everything went dark. And just like that, there was light again. I was lying on the concrete floor in a room filled with a huge generator and other electrical boxes. Just ahead of me was light, not some false promise, but sunlight. It was the door I had broken down earlier, illuminating my face. In the end, unobscured by some kind of eldritch magic. It really had just been a small building to do with the power grid. Max was next to me, also waking up. What the fuck happened? How did we fall asleep, and why do we look like shit? He asked. I was almost relieved. I didn't want him to remember, but I also didn't have an adequate explanation. I simply helped him up. His ankle was still messed up, and we humped out back into the forest. It couldn't have been more than maybe a few hours, if even. The sun had barely moved. I helped him back to my house, where I called him an ambulance to look at his injury. The entire time he was asking questions. I had no answer. I simply said that he tripped on a loose wire, twisted his ankle, and took me with him. He didn't believe me, but he also didn't press further. I don't think he really ever trusted me after that. Again, I could live with that. I had other concerns, and I was happy that he wouldn't have to live with what I had dragged him into. While I would like to say it ended there, it wasn't quite so. What we went through and what I had made Max endure, the memory of it or not, stayed with me, sending daggers through my heart. Then there was the unavoidable reality of what that monster had said to me. I tried to forget and move on. I even went back to Canada, trying to pick up my life. But I began having nightmares, constantly avoiding dark spaces and sleeping with all my lights on. I recently even started going to therapy. It was less to get better, but almost more as a declaration of a fight. That thing would not see me again. I had to get better. Well, I still don't have a job, which is partly why I'm writing this here. Seeing what others have witnessed here made me think it was as good a place as any to tell my story. Therapy helped a little, but my life is still not what I wanted it to be. But I'm trying to stay positive, yet I am afraid. What if I'm just lying to myself? Every time I feel my inner void getting the best of me, I try to think back. I think back to my family accepting me as I am, and how my friend decided to follow me into a hellhole just because he didn't want to leave me alone. Recently, I decided to take a walk through the local park. During the day, of course. Passing by the bathrooms, my eyes drifted, and instead of the halogen lamps, I saw only darkness. I've convinced myself that it was stress, some kind of PTSD, but I can't be sure. I put my head down and kept walking. So here's a bit of advice. Be happy. Trust me. I know it's hard, but there's always something. Find things to be happy about, because if you don't, something else might find you instead. Story 2. The lie is a cake. Day 1. A news report breaks in, redacted New York, about a man waking up the previous morning and attempting to turn on his TV to watch the latest episode of his favorite show, only for his remote to crumble in his hand. Confused as to what was going on, the man would attempt to manually turn on his TV, only to accidentally pull a chunk of it off. It was at this moment that the man would discover that his TV had been replaced with a hyperrealistic cake. The man would question his wife about where the TV went, and why there was a hyper-realistic cake in its place. However, his wife was just as confused as he was about the entire situation at hand. The man would attempt to report this to his local authorities, claiming his TV had been stolen and replaced with a hyper-realistic cake, only to be laughed off as a prankster due to his ridiculous claim. Angry at this, he would take his story to the local news station, hoping for justice to be served to whoever stole his TV. Once again, his claims were laughed off and published as a mere joke. The man would claim that there would be more cases of people's items being replaced, with hyper-realistic cakes going forward, and that they would all regret ignoring his case. Day 29. Police reports coming from all over redacted New York would reveal the man's words to be correct. Starting after a young woman would attempt to open her purse, only for the zip to completely come off upon being pulled and quickly break apart, taking some of the modeling chocolate with it. Soon people would begin reporting all over the area that their items had been completely replaced with cake. Phones, laptops, bags, earrings, necklaces, rings and even stacks of cash were discovered to have been replaced with hyper-realistic cakes. Local authorities, having now clearly learned that this was no prank, are looking into the cases to try and track down these valuable items. However, one thing these cases all have in common, aside from the cakes being delicious, is the complete lack of evidence pointing to any suspects. No DNA evidence, no signs of forced entry, and no people in the area at the time. Nobody is even sure when these items were replaced with cakes. They all say they could have sworn they were real a second ago, only to suddenly be cake, almost as if there was no thief and they had just suddenly turned into cake. Authorities are still on the hunt for a possible suspect in this case, even though the wider New York authorities laugh at them for humoring these absurd claims. Day 47. The situation has escalated much further than anyone could have possibly anticipated. Now, the reports of items being replaced with hyper-realistic cake have rapidly expanded to the rest of New York. Hundreds of people are reporting that their valuable items are being discovered to be hyper-realistic cakes. A man would take his phone out of his pocket to check if he'd received any important emails, only for his phone to crumble into pieces of cake in his hand. A woman would attempt to cash in a check of $100,000 to a bank, only for the modeling chocolate on the check to smash into several pieces when placed down on the counter. A couple would attempt to hurry their kids into the car, worrying they may be late for school, only for the car to fall apart right in front of them. As the door is pulled off and falls to the ground, people are getting scared. They're worrying that at any moment, any of their prized possessions could end up being a hyper-realistic cake. Nobody is sure what is real and what is cake anymore, so they've taken to trying to cut anything they own, hoping to weed out the cake from the non-cake. Many have ended up accidentally destroying many of the things they own in the process of doing this. But those who still have their stuff have taken to putting stickers on them to ensure they know they're real. That was until an edible sticker was found to be on the back of a hyper-realistic cake emulating a mobile phone. Now, people's only option is to place all their valued possessions into safes, covered in locks with an 87 number code that not even they know. The governor of New York has commented on the situation, claiming that he's doing all he can to try and solve the hyper-realistic cake mystery. But he can only do so much to calm the fear and paranoia that has overcome New York. Day 93. The situation has dramatically escalated even further somehow, as the hyper-realistic cake plague has now begun heavily affecting the nearby states of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and even some parts of Canada. Reports are coming in from all over the USA and even some of Mexico and South America of people's items suddenly being replaced with ominous, albeit tasty, hyper-realistic cakes. The president is doing nothing to quell the fear of US citizens, claiming the whole situation is ridiculous and that everyone is a fool for buying into it. People are starting to riot in the streets, believing the president is not doing enough to try and prevent the appearance of hyper-realistic cakes. Many other countries are beginning to consider closing off all travel to the USA out of fear, and some like Germany even going through with it. The safes people were using to hold their valuable items are no longer safe. Many have been discovered to have been replaced with hyper-realistic cakes, leading to even greater fear and paranoia among citizens. And the worst thing of all, the police officer who was in charge of the case in redacted New York was discovered by his wife the previous night to have been replaced with an identical hyper-realistic cake. There is no evidence of where he may have gone, and there is no evidence pointing to who might have taken him. He has seemingly disappeared without a trace. Day 149. As fear was reaching its limits, a spark of hope managed to emerge. Tension has been rising as countries all over the world have been receiving reports of people disappearing and being replaced with hyper-realistic cakes, even including those that shut off travel to the USA. The president has continued to display pure apathy to the situation, claiming the whole thing to be a farce, until he discovered one morning his wife had been turned into a hyper-realistic cake. Outraged at this, he demanded the perpetrator be immediately found and caught. He banned the selling of any ingredients that could be used to make a hyper-realistic cake, including flour, sugar, eggs, butter, baking powder, chocolate, honey, macaroni and cheese. He does not know how to make a cake and decided it was better safe than sorry. But even then, hyper-realistic cakes continued to appear. Now even houses and everything in them were getting replaced with giant, hyper-realistic cakes, twice the size of an average human being. The president was getting desperate now and was willing to do anything to catch the man responsible for this. So he had cameras set up on every street in every city in every state across the entire USA, and he had every cop working 24/7 on the site of each camera, making sure nothing was replaced with a hyper-realistic cake. And if they were to see hyper-realistic cake-related activities, they were to press a button, sounding the alarm. Yesterday, after weeks and weeks of nothing, an extremely tired officer managed to catch a woman attempting to replace a baby with a hyper-realistic cake. The woman, upon being caught, would quickly admit she was behind the hyper-realistic cake shenanigans. She was immediately brought to Washington, D.C., where the president would proceed to scream and cry at her for hours before demanding she be placed in a holding cell so she could be questioned the following day. This was quickly announced by White House officials, and the world began celebrating, praising the president as a hero who was able to end the hyper-realistic cake plague. The joyful people of the world are currently awaiting a word from the US president on who this mysterious woman is, what her motives are, and where she's keeping all these missing people. Day 180. To the horror of everyone around the globe, the following morning, all hope was lost and all dreams were dashed. The woman taken captive last night was found to have been replaced with a hyper-realistic cake. Just as everyone was, the president demanded a search for any evidence indicating how she could have escaped. But they were unable to find anything. Even the cameras meant to keep track of the woman had mysteriously failed to capture anything the previous night. This was the breaking point for the president, and as a result of this, he'd soon become wrapped up in an extremely insane conspiracy. He'd soon begin to believe the cake was a being that was more powerful than any of them, and that it needed to be eradicated at all costs. The presidents would proceed to declare martial law and cut off all transport to other countries. People, seeing exactly what was going to happen, attempted to escape the country by piloting the planes and boats themselves, only to discover the planes and boats were all hyper-realistic cakes that were unable to fly and would easily sink in water. The president would also declare that all cake is to be thoroughly burned, and anyone believed to be a cake is to be executed on sight, preferably by being cut with a blade. The president would have all Secret Service agents executed, claiming that they were conspiring with the cake and aided the woman in escaping custody. But even if this wasn't enough for the president, soon he'd begin believing that other countries were made of cake too, and declared that any countries believed to be cake countries would be bombed off the map. Starting with Mexico, he sent wave after wave of bombs to the country until he was sure anyone inside was dead. He'd soon turn his attention to Germany, believing that it was also a cake country due to them previously closing off transportation from the USA there. Soon, Germany was no more, and the president would celebrate that he had destroyed another cake country. It seemed like to the president that every country except the USA was a cake country, and no amount of bombing he did would change that. Everyone knew the sheer amount of bombs he was using was going to destroy the planet, but he didn't care. But just as quickly as this began, it ended. Yesterday, a large angry mob stormed the White House. The president would attempt to bomb the mob, only to discover the bomb launch pad had been replaced with cake. The mob quickly overpowered anyone left supporting the president with sheer numbers, and they swiftly beat the president to death in a manner too disturbing to even attempt to describe. Blood was everywhere, but they didn't care anymore. The dictator was dead. Day 294. Shortly after the president's death, the USA descended into chaos. People were still being replaced with cake, and nobody had any way to contact people outside the USA, as every single phone was seemingly now a hyper-realistic cake. Many don't even believe there's anyone left out there, and that they were all killed by the president. People quickly began to believe the president was right, and that all the other countries were now just cake. But they took it one step further. They now began to ponder if the entire globe itself was just one giant cake. People began getting so scared of others being cake that they would attempt to cut anyone they meet just to see if they were cake. There is no food left now besides hyper-realistic cakes, and many are so scared of them that they refuse to even go near them, let alone attempt to eat them. Many are dying from starvation, and those willing to eat the cakes are usually branded as cake people and killed on sight. There's still no sign of the people who went missing and were replaced with hyper-realistic cakes. Many believe they just vanished from reality itself, or that they were taken by the cake. Some people have begun to worship the cake as a god and make sacrifices to it, believing it'll bring their loved ones back. Reality is crumbling. Society has fallen apart, and it won't be long until humanity is gone. Day 334. not even a year following the first ever incident. The last human being on Earth has died today, alone, cold and afraid. There is nothing left. No trees, no grass, no water, no animals, no humans. Nothing. The only thing that remains now is the hyperrealistic cakes. And that is the story of how I destroyed humanity with fucking cakes. I guess in the end you could say it was real. Story 3. My cat always leaves me the best gifts. On the morning of Mother's Day this year, I received exactly one gift, a dead rat, deposited at my doorstep by my cat, James. James is black and white, slick and elegant, his fur like a tuxedo. If a cat was cast to replace Daniel Craig in the next Bond film, James would be perfect. In fact, the resemblance is how he got his name in the first place. Thank you, James, I said, bending to stroke his fur as we both examined the little rotting carcass on the welcome mat. He looked up at me hopefully, as if expecting me to take a nibble of his offering. I'll get to that later, I promised. The rest of the family had forgotten the holiday. Not that I blamed them. My husband Saito was busy at work, pulling 70-hour shifts as he prepared a series of PowerPoints to explain his company's corporate structure to a potential buyer. In the meantime, the twins, June and Lily, were busy with spring soccer and last-minute prep for their upcoming AP tests. I spent some time idly making myself coffee while the family slept. Then, around 9, and they all flew past in flurry, the twins off to a soccer game and Saito headed to the office. It wasn't until they'd all left that a lump began to form in my throat, and I headed to the backyard to have a little cry. I felt silly. It was a made-up holiday. After all, not like Christmas or a birthday, though Saito forgot my birthday too this year. For a few minutes, I sat on one of the patio chairs, sniffling pathetically, hoping no one returned early to see me like this. I was about to go back in when I saw James. He was over in the corner of the yard, lying in the shade. Right away, I could tell something was off about him. James always slept curled in a ball, his chin resting on his rear haunch. Today, he was stretched out, bent awkwardly. Even stranger, he seemed to shimmer in the few spots where the dappled sunlight caught his fur. Slowly, I walked over, clicking my tongue in the way he liked. When he didn't move, I softly called his name. Finally, I reached out to touch him, only to find his fur wet. Drawing my hand back, I found it red and bloody in the sunlight, which is when I started screaming. I called Saito a few minutes later. "I need you to come home," I said. "James is dead." "Your friend James? From college?" "Our cat." I realized I was screaming into the phone. "Our only cat." I could practically hear him roll his eyes on the far end of the line. "It's not a good day for this," he said. "I can come back a bit early, take care of the body. Just leave it alone for now." I spent many hours alone that day, sitting in the backyard. In time, flies found James and began to lick at him with their little straw mouths, dipping their horrible little hands in his blood and rubbing them together. It was no use shooing them away. I was sunburned raw by the time Saito came home. He looked at me, incredulous. "What happened to you?" "I was standing vigil," I explained. He rubbed at the bridge of his nose. "Where's the cat?" he asked, and I gestured to the backyard. Every inch of my skin throbbed from the sunburn, but it felt right, like my inside and outside pain matched in some harmonious way. Saito grabbed a wastebasket and started walking toward the backyard. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Taking care of James," he said, trying to use a gentle tone, as if explaining to a child that it was time for bed. "You'll bury him," I said, "at the foot of the maple, 3 feet deep at least." He shook his head. "That's not even legal. Hon. Besides, I was working all day. I'm exhausted." 3 feet deep, I said, and then I went into the garage to find his shovel. The one I located was unused, though we must have bought it years ago. I brought it in and handed it to Saito. He took it without a word and went outside. An hour later, he came in dirty and sweaty. He headed to the shower. I walked to the maple to find the earth there freshly disturbed from digging. Then I found one of James's favorite toys, a fuzzy bird that had once had a bell inside, and affixed it to a stick, which I placed at the head of the grave. At dinner, the twins showed up still in their soccer uniforms. They'd spent the day at the park with friends after the game. "Happy Mother's Day," said June, somewhat sheepishly. She handed me an envelope with a gift card to Jazzy Juice inside. "Thanks," I said. "What's Jazzy Juice?" "It's a smoothie thing," explained Lily. "It's $20. "Thank you," I said again, staring at the card. Maybe I was making a face. "If you don't want it, I can take it back," said June. "My friends and I go there all the time." "No," I said. "I love it. I'm sure I'll love it." "Great," she said, looking disappointed. The next morning I went out into the backyard and screamed. James's grave had been dug up. It was nothing but an empty hole surrounded by a pile of dirt. The stick and the toy were missing too. It didn't seem that deep. By the time Saito ran out to see what was wrong, I was in tears. 3 feet deep," I shouted. I said 3 feet deep. "The soil gets really rocky when you go down that far," he said. I figured it didn't matter. "It mattered," I screamed. I decided to take some me time that afternoon, so I headed to Jazzy Juice. I tried to figure out the menu while I was in line, but I got overwhelmed by all the options. Finally, when I got to the front of the line, I asked if I could just get a basic orange juice. "It would be more like an orange smoothie," said the girl behind the counter, a thin redhead in her 20s, covered in tattoos. "Oh, that's no good," I said. "I don't really like pulp." "No pulp, please." "That's not really what we do here," she said. "Maybe it's a good day to try something new. The berry blitz is super popular." "I want my orange juice," I said. I was probably a little rude, but I was at my limit. "I've got a gift card," I added, "for $20. "Fine," she said. And then, I swear, under her breath she added, "Boomer bitch." "Excuse me?" She didn't meet my eyes. Instead, she turned and started throwing frozen oranges into a blender. "I'm 44, I shouted over the noise as she started the blender. "I'm a millennial, maybe Gen X." Finally, she handed me my drink. It was so pulpy it clogged the straw. She shot me a shit-eating smile. "Have a nice day." I chucked my drink in the garbage on my way out the door. That night, I found myself crying as I tried to make dinner. I could see the little hole that had once contained James's body through the kitchen window, and I couldn't help glancing at it as I tried to peel zucchini. It struck me that James had been the only one in the world who loved me at all. Even worse, it seemed unlikely that no one would ever love me again. I was aging, chubby, and boring. The world didn't want me anymore. Without realizing it, I made a deep cut on my thumb and started bleeding everywhere. For a minute, I just watched the blood ooze out of me, all over the vegetables. That night, I heard a thump. I tried to shake Saito awake, but he was dead asleep. Finally, I got up and walked downstairs. There was another thump now, louder, then a series of 3 more thuds right by the front door. Slowly, I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and then walked through the darkness. As I did, I heard a familiar sound that seemed impossible. It was James's distinctive meow, the little cry he'd deliver at the door when he wanted my attention. And yet it was somehow different now, a lower, deeper mewing. "Hello?" I asked as I walked to the door, but there was no sound now. I heard footsteps outside. Not a cat's, but something bigger, maybe human. Finally, I reached the door and slowly turned the knob. I opened it just a crack, peeking through to see if anyone was outside. At first, I saw no one, just the empty street in the moonlight. A few night-blooming flowers had opened their petals, but otherwise the neighborhood looked dull and lifeless. Then I looked down and had to stifle a scream. There, on my doorstep, lay a body, its chest still fluttering with life, but mostly torn to shreds. Great. Bloody gashes had left the green apron in tatters. The skin's intricate tattoos sundered to islands of nonsense. The girl's red hair was now redder. Though her skull was crushed, her pretty face nearly ripped off the bone. I knew immediately it was the girl from the juice shop. My body tensed as I watched her chest cease its fluttering, and the flow of blood slowed to a trickle. Soon, she was still as the rest of the street. Then, suddenly, my heart was pounding again, as I realized I was not alone in the darkness. Something dark and massive was moving past the nearby bushes, watching me examine its kill. Though it moved somewhat like a cat, the thing was far bigger, larger than any tiger I'd ever seen at the zoo. As it grew closer, I saw that it was standing on its hind legs, walking toward me, not quite like a person, but like an animal trying to mimic one. I could barely breathe now. It was growing closer, though it moved slowly. I could sense that it could cover the 10 feet between us in a moment, far faster than I could slam the door. "Please," I said, "don't." As the creature walked into a slant of moonlight, I realized that it was dressed in a tuxedo, or were those just the colors of its fur? "My queen, I would never," the creature purred, in a low voice. "I live only to serve you." I looked down at the dead girl by my feet. I would have to call the police. I knew I would have to scream for Saito to come and help. There would be so much to explain, but I wasn't afraid now. That moment had passed. I was here with a friend. "James?" I asked, and he nodded ever so slightly. "You can't do this," I said. "I didn't want this." "But she was so cruel to you," said James. "She called you a very nasty name. I was hiding a few blocks away, but I heard everything. My ears are very sensitive." "But you can't just kill people," I said, trying to stuff my growing panic into my stomach. It's not right." "Of course I can," said James. "In fact, I must. It's my nature." "Never again," I whispered. James cocked his head, looking me in the eyes. What was he looking for? "I could stop if you order it," he said, "though that would be unfortunate. You know I love to honor you with gifts. I always have. But go ahead. Make the command and I will disappear, never to leave you another present again." I looked down at the dead girl, all torn to shreds. There was a certain beauty in it, like a stained glass window, sublime in its brokenness. "Just say the word," James said again. But I didn't. "Thank you," I finally said, bending to look closer at the dead girl, "for the gift." "It was but a trifle, my queen," said the thing. "Until next time." And then, bowing slightly, he backed away and bounded into the darkness. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.